We are going to take a look at cartogram maps, and we're going to look at page 717 in your geography textbook. And this page actually shows you how to do a social studies skill. Now we're not going to be creating a cartogram right now. We are going to talk about how to read a cartogram. And a cartogram map is this bottom map right here. They are crazy looking maps. In our old geography book, on page 210 in the old geography book, this was a cartogram map that they had. So they do look pretty weird. Now the one above this map here, that is a political map. So you'd be used to seeing this political map in order to find things made by man, like countries, for instance. Whereas a cartogram map, they're less common. So cartogram maps display statistical information. They're showing usually the amount of something. Now usually they do this in more of like a box or a square form, and so these maps tend to look really boxy. You can notice here on the political map, like Iran, like see how curvy its borders are? Saudi Arabia, see it's got these like borders that are curvy. Whereas if you come down here, Iran is very boxy. You also have Saudi Arabia again, more of a boxy shape. You see that Kazakhstan up here is really large, but down here, these countries, well, they look different. They're not quite the same shape. They're very boxy, and they are not quite the size you would expect them to be. So we're going to talk about these cartogram maps that are displaying statistical information, like the amount of something. We're going to talk about why they do that and how to do them. Even though they're crazy looking maps, they're not too bad. My kids usually like these types of maps, so hopefully you will too. They're not as scary as what you would think. And you're going to follow the 3 main steps that you've already learned previously to do them. And then we'll tack one extra step on at the end, but not a hard one. So the first thing that you need to do is read the title, and the title of this map on page 717 is Southwest and Central Asia, so it's only concentrating on those countries. The second step that you need to do is to read the legend. This legend for this map is pretty small. It says that a square is an area this size that represents 1 million people. So every time you see this square, no matter the color on this map, it represents 1 million people. So the more squares, the more people. The fewer squares, the fewer amount of people that live there. Now you be careful, because on this cartogram map, it is looking at 1 million people. On other maps, it could be looking at, and that each square could mean 5 million people. Or on a different cartogram map, each square could represent 10 people. It may not even be about people. In this case it is, but it could be about the amount of internet users. It could be about the population of cheetahs. So do make sure you read your legend. That is important. Now it's time to match the colors and symbols on the map with the colors and symbols on the legend. So you have to match up this legend with these countries. Remember that they are not going to look like the right shape. Okay? For instance, if we look here at Iran, we see that it is not the right shape. It is not the right shape because if you do not have enough people, then you can't earn a square. You have to have at least 1 million people to get a square. So if we want to get a better shape, we would have to have enough people to start kind of filling it in over here. However, Iran looks a lot better than some of the other countries, Saudi Arabia for instance. They do not have enough people to really come down and make this bottom part. You can see it. It's supposed to look like this, but they don't have enough people. Remember, to get a square on the map, you have to have at least 1 million people. So that could also mean that some countries may not even show up on the map. So if you don't have at least 1 million people within your country, you are not going to earn a square. Now I believe every country is on the map here because every country does have at least 1 million people. Now you might be asking, what if you have like 1,500,000 people. Can I then get another square? The answer to that is no. You at least have to have 1,000,000 to get a square. So to get your second square, you have to have a total of 2,000,000 people. Okay? And again, the only way you're going to get closer to your actual size and shape is by having enough people. They can't just make up the information and place squares there to get the right shape. It actually has to represent real information. So let's take Bahrain for a second. So if you don't know where Bahrain is, there is a political map up here. It is pretty tiny. Okay, after you find Bahrain, you are going to come down here to your cartogram map. And so right here, and you can see that it's red. Now on this map, red doesn't mean anything. You can see here, the legend doesn't show anything with color. So the color doesn't really matter, it's just showing you country borders. Okay, so don't worry about the red that you see for Bahrain. So now I'm going to count 1, 2 squares. Each square equals 1,000,000 people. So 1,000,000 people per square. That makes 2,000,000 people, because 1,000,000 plus 1,000,000 equals 2,000,000. Bahrain may have 2,650,000 people, but they do not have enough to get another square on the map, because you have to have at least 1,000,000 people to get a square. So they have at least 2,000,000 people, but they have less than 3,000,000 people living in Bahrain. Okay? So we're going to look at another cartogram map, and this one comes from our old geography textbook. And so the first thing you'll do with any map, including a cartogram map, is read the title. And this title is Oil Reserves Cartogram. Then you're going to read the legend. You're going to read the entire legend. So we have like an orange color, meaning 1 to 10 billion barrels of oil reserves. So that's how much oil they have kind of in storage. And then you have like this orangey red color. It says 10 to 40 billion barrels. And you have a little bit different shade of it for 40 to 100 billion barrels. And then you have a dark red for 100 plus billion barrels. So they might have 125 billion barrels if they have that color. Or they might have 150 billion barrels if they have that color, but at least 100 billion barrels. Now I do say read the whole legend, because we also see here that each square equals 1 billion barrels. So one could count the squares, or you could get kind of a quick overview of who has the most oil in reserve by just looking at the colors. This is definitely a cartogram map where the colors make a difference. Unlike the other cartogram map we just looked at, for population, where it just showed country borders with those colors, here it actually is showing the amount of oil. The color really does mean something. And keep in mind that a cartogram map, it is not used to show country sizes and country borders. Instead, a cartogram map is used to show the amount of something. So a cartogram map shows the amount of something that you have, whether it be the amount of pandas living in the world, or the amount of people that use cell phones. Could even be the amount of people with an illness. In this case, though, it is oil reserves. Now the third step with reading a cartogram, after you read the legend, is to match the colors and symbols on the map with the colors and symbols on the legend. So you'll want to take a moment and just kind of preview the map. Do be aware, since this doesn't show the correct size of the countries, these countries are going to look really weird. Like you can see here that the United States doesn't really look like the United States there. We are totally missing parts of Canada and, parts of New York and South Carolina. California should be all the way up here. Canada is really tiny above us and it should be much larger. Okay. So countries look really weird. South America, that continent, well, it's pretty much gone. So, but that's not what a cartogram is for. A cartogram is going to show the amount of something. It's showing some type of statistical data. You can see that a lot of these Central American countries like Guatemala and Honduras are missing, and that is because they don't have at least 1 billion barrels of oil in order to earn a square. In fact, a lot of South America is missing. I mean, you do have Brazil, but it's much smaller than what it should be. It's one of the biggest countries in the Americas. I don't see, like, Bolivia. I don't see Paraguay. Like, there's a lot of places missing here. So we're going to try out some examples using a map from our old geography book, and it's on page 10 of the old geography book, and it's called the Oil Reserves Cartogram. So we've read the title. Now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to read the legends. That's step 2. And you read the whole thing. So you can see that this orange color here means 1 to 10 billion barrels. This kind of like light pinkish red color is 10 to 40 billion barrels. Then you have this kind of darker pink as 40 to 100 billion barrels, and then you have a dark red as 100 plus billion barrels. Each square equals 1 billion barrels. And again, this is oil in reserve. Okay, so we are going to try a question now, and my question is, how many barrels of oil in reserve does the United Kingdom have? So, you've already read the title, you've already read the legend. Now we find the United Kingdom. It's in the same area, but it's not going to look like the United Kingdom because cartogram maps are not for the shapes of countries, and they're not for the sizes of countries. That would be for the political map. Now we already know that since it's yellow, and the legend says that yellow means 1 to 10 billion barrels, or I guess we should say it's orange yellow, that we know it has between 1 and 10 billion barrels. Now we're going to count each square, and according to the legend, each square is going to be 1 billion barrels. Okay. So let's go over here and count for the United Kingdom. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they have at least 5 billion barrels. Now, my question is, does that mean they only have 5 billion barrels of oil in reserve? And your answer should be not necessarily. They could have 5 billion 23 barrels of oil in reserve. And that's because you had to have 1 billion barrels to get 1 square. Now we know they don't have 6 billion barrels, because if they had 6 billion barrels, they would have another square up there. Okay? So they have between 5 and 6 billion barrels of oil in reserve for the United Kingdom. So a couple of things to realize there is the countries, again, will not be the right shape or size. They may be much larger or much smaller than what they should be. Like if you look at the United States, we don't have enough oil in reserve. So our country doesn't really look like the United States. Like it's missing like Maine and New York and all these states over here. Canada is way smaller than what it should be. It should be much larger. We also can see by the colors that these are not representing country borders. They're representing the amount of oil reserved in each area. And so the colors do not mean borders on this particular map. And that is different than the map you looked at earlier in your new geography textbook. Alright, let's do another question. Who has more oil? Kuwait or Saudi Arabia? Now this should be really easy. You don't even have to count because you can tell that Saudi Arabia is a dark red, which means 100+ billion barrels, and that Kuwait is like this pink color, and that means 40 to 100 billion barrels. So even without counting, you can tell that Saudi Arabia has more oil. Not only that, but Saudi Arabia just looks bigger. By the way, Kuwait is usually a very tiny country on a political map. Like, it's really tiny. And so this definitely would show that this map is for the amount of something, not necessarily for the size and shape of the country. In fact, I'll show you a map of Kuwait in just a second. So this is a map of Asia. And on this Asia political map, you can see Kuwait is right there. It's that little bitty country right there. So it looks a lot bigger on that Cartogram map, and that's because they do have a lot of oil in this area.